Locke versus Tyrion. Gentlemen Bastards going up against the Game of Thrones. Certainly two different calibers of fantasy here, one much more focusing on a personal kind of crime element, while the other is a fantasy epic that encompasses an entire world. This leads to inherently different approaches to the series, one being much more focused on a specific location and plotline, while the other is Game of Thrones. But going ahead and jumping into this, we have the 7 categories: origin, development, role they play in the world they are in, interest for the reader, relationships, who would win in a fight, and last but not least, who would do better in the other's world. This matchup seems to be a great kicking off for one of these two because they are a very similar pairing while contrasting each other very well. Charismatic bastards in metaphorical senses. Neither of them are actually a bastard. So with the first category, origin, Tyrion has pretty much a unique origin for the fantasy genre in an absolute sense. I don't know of any other dwarf character in fantasy, and his story of being rejected by his family, hated by everyone, and developing into the smartest lip in the Lannister family results in an incredible start to this character. I love Tyrion. You guys know that about me. He's pretty much my favorite, if maybe second favorite character from the Game of Thrones. Locke, on the other hand, being this oh so famous grand criminal, someone who we as the reader can connect to on that id part of our brain that wants to be the criminal, that wants to go against the status quo, is very interesting. But no, it does not hold a candle to the originality and magnificent execution that is Tyrion. The first point goes to Tyrion Lannister. Next up, we have development. Locke becomes more human. He seems to be fairly carefree at the beginning of the first Gentlemen Bastards book, but as the stakes begin to rise and the world starts to have more consequences around him, he starts feeling the weight of his actions follow. Meanwhile, Tyrion's development is much more based in anger and resentment. His family being so cruel, seeing everyone close to him slowly turn their backs one by one, leads us to a much more jaded Tyrion, who eventually finds solace with the Mother of Dragons. He is someone who, as the readers, we can get behind in almost every sense. He's an outcast, which makes him more relatable to us, because that's just something that in reading people tend to relate to. He's smart, funny, and certainly one of the most charismatic characters in this entire series. All of these decisions bring us as the reader to back Tyrion in almost everything he does. I'm a huge fan of the development here, and once again, he gets the development point. Now we have role they play in the world they are in. Locke finally stands a chance because he's the main character. He is absolutely the center point of the Gentlemen Bastards series, someone who we as the reader absolutely focus on almost entirely, except for maybe Jean. Tyrion's story is really to help us as the reader balance out the dread and horror of the world we are experiencing, and it's something that I really enjoy. It's used to counterbalance the kind of overwhelming sense of dread and morbidity we as the reader can feel while diving into Game of Thrones. But that being said, it does not counterbalance against Locke's basically being the focal point of his entire world and really the person we experience the Gentlemen Bastards series through, so Locke gets the role point. Now we have interest for the reader, and this is going to be pretty much the biggest compliment I can give to George R. R. Martin here. Yes, Tyrion is not the main character of his series, but the level of interest I feel when encountering his storylines throughout A Song of Ice and Fire really bump him up to an incredible height. Everything Tyrion is involved in is heightened due to his involvement. I think his influence on events in the world is really something that motivates us as the reader to stay invested in this series. Yes, Locke is the focal point of Gentlemen Bastards, but the writing caliber is just not there to get us as the readers as invested as we would be with Tyrion. I at no point in while reading Gentlemen Bastards felt as invested or interested in Locke's storylines as I have as Tyrion's, and that's saying something knowing Tyrion is not the focal point of his series. George R. R. Martin is one of the greatest writers of our time, and it's going to be reflected in points like these where his non-focal characters can knock out focal characters of other series without much effort. Tyrion Lannister gets the interest point. Now we have relationships, and here is the first point where I find it to be very close. Tyrion's relationships are almost entirely negative. There are very few people in the world he comes in contact with that do not treat him poorly. Those he considers friends end up abandoning him, and his family certainly has no soft spots for him, except for maybe his brother Jaime. But even that in both the TV show and books has been tested and strained to a near-breaking, if not broken, point. These relationships are written incredibly well, and I think for every reader going in, it's something that really gets you on Tyrion's side. No matter who he's talking with, you want him to make a connection. You want Tyrion to have a friend, someone he can rely on, and it just seems to not be there until maybe way later on in the series when he comes to side with Daenerys Targaryen. On the other side of this, we have Locke and his relationship with Jean and a few other people. Yes, they are very good, well-executed relationships, and the ending of the last book of the Gentleman Bastard series ripped my heart out, but Tyrion overall has better fleshed out, better written relationships throughout his series, and he claims this point as well. Finally, we have who would win in a fight, and unfortunately in my bracket there can be no stand-ins for these fights, so it must be Tyrion versus Locke, and Locke wins quite handily. Now we have who would do better in the other's world, the point that does not matter unless it's a tie, which this is not, so it doesn't really matter, but still we're going to mention it and bring it in, so here we go. I actually believe Tyrion would do better in Gentleman Bastards than Locke would do in Game of Thrones. This is due to Locke essentially relying on dumb luck and extremely over-convoluted complex plans that happen to work out against all odds repeatedly. Yes, this shows a lot of intelligence on his side, and I'm not denying that it is there, but in Game of Thrones, people have much more blunt, direct ways of dealing with people and things that I think he is used to. There's not a whole lot of let's talk about it in Game of Thrones. People just kill each other right there and then. Meanwhile, in Gentleman Bastards, there's always a lot of talking. Lots and lots of talking before action is done. There's even one crime lord who spends weeks, if not months, to build a giant subterfuge just so we can massacre his enemies. And I'm not bashing Gentleman Bastards here. You guys know I love this series, but it's something that's just an aspect of this world and seems to be the cultural norm. This would play right into Tyrion's hands. He's all about his words. He can talk his way out of anything, and I think in the Gentleman Bastards world, he would be thriving and probably do incredibly well in the crime syndicate run city that exists. Meanwhile, Locke would probably be a middling to decent thief in the Game of Thrones world, a much larger scope than he's used to dealing with, and a much stricter society than he's ever encountered, one where the criminals do not often openly rule. I think that he would do rather poorly and at most be a mildly successful crime lord. That is about it. So this point goes to Tyrion as well as the victory. This was a very easy video to do, not because Gentleman Bastards is bad by any means, but because Game of Thrones is just another caliber. I don't think Gentleman Bastards is trying to be what Game of Thrones tries to with this epic, sprawling detail into every aspect. Gentleman Bastards is more about just having fun and following a few characters that you love, and that series absolutely thrives on that, and it's certainly worth reading if you have not picked it up. But Tyrion is Tyrion, and while it may not be my personal favorite, Game of Thrones is inarguably one of the greatest fantasy series ever written. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Like and subscribe if you've not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support the channel, and peace.